In regards to utility infrastructure, though, I know that a few companies have experienced power cut and water loss as well. What are your experiences in this area?
We see quite clearly the shortage of electricity supply over the years to come. And also when we look into the water situation, there has been no major upgrades. There's a lot of patchwork going on. And I would expect that utilities can be the most worrying part of infrastructure, if I may say so.
Have you experienced any power cut with your operation?
Sure, we did experience some problem with power supply.
How do you respond to those challenges?
Of course, the first thing we have to do is to look back into our organization to see if we have an opportunity to optimize the operation, just to cope with the power supply problem. And the second response to the issue is to, of course, send a complaint to the power supply.
Does it ever get resolved?
Yes, some promise. Some promise.
Okay, so apart from infrastructure, which is a big chunk of the challenges that you've got in Vietnam, are there any other key challenges that you've seen in the supply chain network in Vietnam?
We are developing the economy towards more value-added services. So the question is on how we can ensure like a upstream integration. So what that actually means is how can we attract suppliers of key sectors in Vietnam, whether it's garment, footwear, or also other sectors, consumer goods sectors, to offer the necessary input materials for Vietnam. This industry is a rather capital intensive and not so much labor intensive. That is indeed the difficulty for Vietnam, to attract these kind of industries so that they can have a larger integrated production base, and then obviously also are less depending on the labor cost.
You've also mentioned the lack of a supplier base in Vietnam. How is the situation going at the moment with that?
I would see some improvement, but this takes decades. This takes maybe 10 or 20 years to develop that industrial cluster, which Vietnam would need to bring up the GDP up to the next level.
So are you relying on raw material imports at the moment?
Yes, some we call strategic raw materials.
But with the supply chain network in Vietnam, as you've mentioned, very new industry for Vietnam at the moment. Are there challenges that you see with HR and planning as well in the country?
Yeah, I mean, if you look into the supply chain concept, we indeed will recognize that if we would go to most companies, they may not have even a complete or comprehensive supply chain organization. Internationals, obviously, yes. Vietnamese companies, less to that extent. And so we not necessarily have enough management resources. That would be one thing. Second aspect to that, you mentioned planning. And there we look also a little bit into the cultural dimension of that. And coming from Europe, I would recognize that in Vietnam, people, they are very strong in improvising, and they're very strong in putting a lot of energy and solving problems. That is really amazing and characterize the country. On the other side of the token, we will see that they may not put so much faith in planning. And so it has some cultural aspect to that as well.
Would you agree with him on the planning aspect of the culture?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think I have the same issue as Kurt just mentioned. I have to deal with a lot of vendors in my daily operation, and most of the vendors are having no long-term vision or long-term plan. Let's say 3 to 5 years planning. What a plan is just for 1 month ahead. Or let's say 1 or 2 days ahead.
So what you're saying is that there is a challenge with the services of logistics provider here in Vietnam.
Yes, sure. Definitely. I mean, we should not forget that this sector has been one of the exception of the WTO. So what that means is the liberalization and deregulation of that sector is even later than other sectors. So the need for a joint venture partner, the limitation of foreign investment. So as a result, obviously, the large companies could only start their integrated operation a few years ago. It's definitely a big challenge for the industry to move from a very traditional fragmented market towards more like a regionally or globally integrated setup.
Yeah, I think you're right, Eckhart. I would say many local vendors are working on very simple piece of work only in logistics. It's not a chain. What we want them to do is the higher integration of their business into ours. Like they can follow up the demand from the customer, report back what is the situation there at the customer side, and suggest a plan to deliver. This does not happen at the moment.
We do have challenges, particularly in this area, as I can see from your comments. But business still has to go on in Vietnam, right?
Sure.
So how do you, as supply chain practitioners, ensure that you've got efficient planning and management of supply chain in Vietnam at this current stage?
I mean, one of the objectives of our organization obviously is as Vietnam supply chain to provide assistance in this area. We have a short-term training session where we try to answer some of those operational issues and what can be done on the short term. Higher sophisticated solutions from Europe or US might not be fully applicable. So we need to take from the toolbox what works well in the local environment, and we have been quite successful in
such a great organization for Vietnam. Congratulations on that. But let me touch base on a very sensitive issue in supply chain, and which is something that I have experienced myself doing business in Vietnam, which is the kickback or the commission-based culture for purchasing and sourcing here. What is your personal experience in that particular area, and how do you resolve the issue in Vietnam?
When we have to work in an operation like that, we have to really have a very strong local knowledge on how to deal with that. And there's obviously an absolute need for strong control and for some encouragement to stay away from that.
Have you ever disciplined anyone for such a behavior? Fortunately, not yet. But I think as a large international organization that I'm working in, we have to have rules and regulations. We have to bring into the organization an ethic code, ethic rules, and also we introduce a lot of competitiveness into the business, just to minimize the level of kickback. On that note, I would like you both to answer the last question to the audience. And the question is, if you have an advice for a new investor coming to Vietnam in terms of supply chain setup and management efficiently in Vietnam, what would be that advice?
First, I would advise the investor to not be too much confused by the news, because we read and hear a lot about Vietnam on the positive and negative side, and only if you see and talk to people on the ground, you will be able to separate the small news from the big news and to also understand the overall bigger picture of Vietnam. Secondly, I think we always need to see what are the specific strengths and weaknesses of the Vietnamese production sector. So there are some industry where there is a very strong fit of Vietnamese skills to the investment. Just one example would be the high level of craftsmanship of Vietnamese workers, the good work ethics of the factory worker, the high level of learning and adaptation of young people and the management. So where there's a good match, there is also obviously a good opportunity for the investor. Thirdly, I would like to encourage the investor to follow the success secret of Vietnamese investors, and they start always small steps, and to be flexible. That is the right approach in a dynamic market like Vietnam, and that's where we have to learn. And maybe the fourth point I would like to highlight, we have talked a lot about supply chain technology and so on. But from my experience, I think one of the key factors why certain investments and projects fail are solely from a HR and cultural aspect. So if we don't see the importance of the close link of Vietnamese partners with foreign partners or investors, if that doesn't work well, we can have a great business case and we have a great cost advantage, but chances are high we may fail in the end. And that's the aspect also which we would like to add from our organization, that we don't look only at the technology, that we strongly look at the people behind.
That's a very practical lesson that you've got there. What about you? What do you think?
For myself, I think to the investors, foreign investors, I would say, let's come to Vietnam and let's explore opportunities in Vietnam. They are exciting and challenging.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being on the show with us today.
It's our pleasure.
My pleasure also.
As you can see, infrastructure has been the #1 challenge for supply chain planning and management in Vietnam. Investment demand over the next 10 years will amount to 120 to 150 billion US dollars, of which 50% will come from state budget, SOEs, ODA, and government bonds. The government has called for private investment in infrastructure through public-private partnership. We hope that this strategy will respond effectively to the current challenges and therefore open up new investment opportunities for you all. If you have questions for this topic, please send them to phi@insidevietnam.com.vn. For past episodes and show updates, please visit Inside Vietnam on WordPress, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. My name is Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Thank you very much for spending time with me on the show today, and I hope that together we can help make a difference to the Vietnamese economy.